Hey guys, it's me and Michael, back again with another video today, and in this vid we are going to be talking about Sarah Everard's death and the consequences from that, and essentially the fallout from this tragic event. If you don't know who Sarah Everard is, you might not know if you don't live in Britain. She was a marketing executive who vanished while walking home from a friend's flat in South London on March the 3rd. Her body was then found hidden in a builder's bag in an area of woodland in Ashford, Kent, last Wednesday, and the person responsible for her death appears to be Wayne Couzens, a 48-year-old man who was a police officer in the London Metropolitan Police, and I think that is really what made the story go from, I guess, just a normal tragic event to, oh wow, this is Sarah Everard became a household name because she was killed by a police officer who was off duty at the time. So, Michael, obviously we've got a lot to discuss with this video. There's a lot of topics to touch on, but what is the first thing you want to talk about today?
Well, actually, the first thing I want to talk about is it's maybe a bit of a cynical, perhaps not really hot take, but a slightly warmish take relating to why I'm a bit concerned about this having been the catalyst for this being a discussion about gendered violence, obviously against women. And it's that I think Sarah Everard falls into the category of, I believe, what feminist theorist Jessica Valenti described as the perfect victim. Obviously, she is a white middle-class woman who was attacked by a stranger on the street, and obviously the fact she was attacked by a police officer I think is relevant as well, because a lot of the discussion around this has been focused on the fact that it wasn't her fault. She didn't do anything wrong. She was, who wouldn't trust a police officer when they're walking down the street? Very much putting the focus on how she didn't do anything wrong. And I think there's a way in which that can be used to create a productive discussion, which we'll get into in a minute. But I also think it is concerning in that I imagine it could take away focus from the fact that, of course, what all feminists and people in general who are opposed to violence against women should be focusing on is that obviously there are many women who might get attacked by men after they've been out drinking all night, or going on a Tinder hookup or something. There's lots of scenarios where women who, and of course not to mention women of colour, women who might not be portrayed as sympathetically by the media are becoming victims of this kind of sexual violence. So that is my slightly cynical take, that maybe the fact that the focus has happened around this, like I say, white middle-class woman who was just attacked by a stranger on the street does fall a bit into a lot of familiar kind of media tropes around gendered violence.
Yeah, what was the term that you said Jessica Valenti coined?
Perfect victim.
Yeah, I think that really does resonate with me, that phrase, because that's what it did feel like. But the thing is, it has sparked this conversation, and yes, I do think you can be cynical about it, but at least a conversation has been sparked, and it has taken the perfect victim to do that, and there's plenty of other victims who should have sparked a conversation, but at least it's happened, I guess. That's my take on it with this tragic event. So also, Michael, you mentioned before that Sarah Everard did quote unquote everything right, and she still ended up being murdered. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, I did. And this is something which actually I first remember, kind of one of the first examples I saw of people talking about gendered violence and particularly sexual assault was this focus on a situation where a lot of men, a lot of kind of anti-feminists back when, anti-feminists were very big on YouTube and things like that, were coming out and saying, in response to this whole teach men not to rape thing, they were acting as if the idea was that this was saying women shouldn't have any sense of taking reasonable precautions. And lots of them were coming out and kind of very, ignorantly and obtusely saying, well, are you saying that women just should do, whatever they want, and with no regard to safety at all, and talking, and obviously I think the comparison a lot of people make is saying that, walking around in a short skirt and expecting you won't be sexually assaulted is like walking around a dark alley with cash spilling out of your pockets and expecting you won't be mugged. But of course, the point that lots of people point out is that many women already are taking a lot of precautions. And I will say that is an example of where the fact that this woman, I guess, kind of was the perfect victim who did the things that she should have done to avoid being in the situation has actually caused a more valuable discussion around the fact that many women are taking these precautions. Of course, you've seen lots of women come out and talk about how they walk around with their keys kind of clenched up in their fists so that if someone attacks them, they can give them a punch full of lanyard or whatever. So, it's shown that actually lots of women have come out and said, no, the point is we are taking these sensible precautions. We are obviously not being stupid. We're, making sure to realize that the world is a dangerous place. But the reality is we're still getting attacked. And there's a point at which you have to realize it's a numbers game. And there's just too many men out there who are, engaging in predatory behavior. And the solution, therefore, has to arrive at teaching men to, not rape.
Yeah, you're exactly right there, Michael. I mean, the problem should be how men act, not how women behave. And that is something that I hope going forward will be the realization of the general public in Britain. I did see, I guess I'll call it a farcical solution to the problem, which was proposed by the government, putting plainclothes police officers in clubs and bars to protect women. And this was, again, farcical, I think, for a couple of reasons. Number one, in the case of Sarah, it was literally a police officer who murdered her. And number two, again, it was when she was walking home at night. That was the issue, not when she was in a club or a bar. And yeah, I do think that if you have solutions like this that are coming from the government, that is quite depressing, in all honesty, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think more depressing when you see the kind of wider context around the response to Sarah Everard's death and obviously the protests there and what the government has done since then. It does seem like we're a long way away from, let's say, sensible evidence-based policy on this issue.
Yes, that is one reason why I was depressed after the news came out about her death. That was a solution apparently to the problem. But another reason was that, of course, as many people will have known, there was a vigil remembering Sarah at Clapham Common, basically where she or near where she was kidnapped on last Saturday. And even though of course we're in COVID times, people wanted to still have that vigil to just remember her, pay respects to her, etc. And there was an argument from the Metropolitan Police that you can't do it because of COVID rules, even though, and this is quite a crucial thing, I think Chris Whitty has said something like this, that basically these kind of mass outdoor events, these protests or visuals, etc., they don't actually cause a spike or an increase in the COVID rate because they're outside. There's plenty of ventilation, and everybody I saw in the videos at that visual was wearing masks. So yeah, I do not think that there was any COVID risk there. And this was of course the case in the summer of 2020 with the Black Lives Matter protests across America, when COVID hit America. And there were studies done that there was no COVID spikes because of that. Because like I said, everyone was wearing masks and everyone was outside, so a lot of ventilation. So basically the vigil should have gone ahead, and it did go ahead, and everything was going fine until apparently, according to eyewitnesses, the police at the vigil decided to break it up after basically, I think 7 p.m, people were going home. They started to use some force, and no doubt many of you watching will have seen the video of that happening, but we're going to play it anyway now, so here you go. So there you have it. Michael, do you want to talk a bit about the optics of what the police were doing in that video?
I personally think the optics don't look good. I mean, you just had a woman murdered by a police officer, and now a bunch of women have come out to say that they don't think violence against women is a good thing. And in response to that, there has been a large amount of violence against women. You have women being dragged around
Perpetuated
by
by
police
the police.
officers. Yes, exactly.
Yeah, that's
police
the key
officers
thing.
using their big physical violence to oppress women who are just standing up against violence.
Yeah.
Not a good look.
I mean, the irony of that is horrifying, really, and I think many people obviously condemn the video. But again, another depressing point is there doesn't look like there's going to be any consequences for the police's actions at the vigil on Saturday. Cressida Dick, Britain's most senior police chief. Basically, there was calls for her to resign, but she dismissed armchair critics after the outrage over the officers manhandling the women, who, of course, were mourning the killing of Sarah Everard. And yeah, she was rebuked by the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan. But she apparently is still going to keep her job. Boris Johnson and Patel let it be known that Cressida Dick retained their confidence. That was on last Sunday. And this was the same woman, by the way, who was head of the operation that killed Jean-Charles Dimenez. Don't know if you remember that, Michael, happened over 10 years ago. This Brazilian guy basically was shot on a tube in London, and the murder was covered up. And he was basically innocent. And she was in charge of that whole thing. She still has her job. She's still Britain's most senior police officer. So you absolutely love to see her. Also I do want to point out that the day after the vigil happened, of course, there were more protests in London, as you might imagine. Protests in front of Scotland Yard, the head of the Metropolitan Police in London. And how did the Met respond to this? They put officers. This was quite bizarre, but not when you really think about it. They put officers, I don't know if you saw, in front of the Winston Churchill statue in Parliament, even though there was no evidence it was under any threat. This protest had nothing to do with Winston Churchill, but you can see that the police put officers in front of the statue, and it was bizarre because, like I said, there was no reason why anyone would go after Churchill. There was nothing about Churchill in this protest, but then you realise what they were doing. The Metropolitan Police were trying to signal to the press and the government, hey, that these protesters, shouldn't be listened to. They're the same people who defaced the Churchill statue. It's all the same thing, isn't it? Even though it was different people protesting against different things, it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, the protesters, what they want to do is they just want to cause chaos and deface our beautiful, iconic statues. Basically, a pathetic stunt by the Metropolitan Police. And I look at that, and you can see right there from that action how serious the Met are taking the situation of male violence, and the fact that one of their police officers literally just murdered a woman who was just walking down the street. So that's another depressing point that from this whole episode.
And I mean, the funny thing is that given the state of the UK, they really wouldn't have had to have waited that long for a racial injustice to cause outrage, so they could have made a slightly more accurate comparison. But of course, there is no similarity at all, really, between this issue and the Black Lives Matter thing. So it's just so weird that they've been trying to characterize it that way. And honestly, it's shocking to me. I know we mentioned the optics already, but it's just shocking to me how much the government, apart from the moral aspect, just how kind of stupid it seems of them to be going into it with this attitude of trying to shut down these protests, when you think it should be easy publicity for them to come out and just say the standard things, say how sorry they are about this happening and how they're going to do better in the future. But no, they opted for the dragging women to the floor approach.
Well, that's the thing. That's what they say that, but that's what they actually want to do. They want to drag women to the floor. They essentially, this government particularly does not appear to be that fond of protests, and we can see that from a new bill that's been proposed by Priti Patel. This bill, it's like a police and crime bill, would really limit protest within the UK. And this is in non-COVID times. You could make an argument, even though, like I said before, I think that's quite discredited, that during COVID times people shouldn't protest as much because of risk of transmission. But this is just normal times. Basically, what Priti Patel wants to do is limit protests in the UK, and we can see from this graphic how harsh these laws are going to be. So, Michael, can you take us through this new bill?
Yeah, so this bit specifically, obviously there are other aspects of the bill, but it says, first of all, if you do an act, or also if you don't do an act, so presumably that would be things like not moving out of somebody's way, in a way which causes harm, of which it defines harm as either causing serious annoyance, or else, and this is the more, if you didn't think serious annoyance was vague enough, put somebody at risk of suffering serious annoyance, then you could be sentenced to a maximum imprisonment of 10 years. So that's the very basic summary of it. But I mean, there it is. If you do an act that puts somebody at risk of serious annoyance, then that's considered illegal.
That's crazy. So you're having a protest, like it could be a one-person protest, like outside of, I don't know, a shop or something. And if somebody says, hey, that person's annoying me, you could get arrested for that. And apparently, just up to 10 years in prison for that. That's what the bill says. I mean, who knows if judges will enforce that, but that is extremely draconian. Like it's slashing civil liberties. And essentially what this bill does is grant police the power to decide that, people who basically they just don't like for whatever reason they feel like can be deemed to have broken the law and therefore end up in jail because of that. I mean, and I bring this up, of course, because this bill passed in the Houses of Parliament on Tuesday. All but one Conservative MP voted for it, I believe. They really care about free speech and all of that and censorship. This, of course, just happened a few days after the scenes we saw on Clapham Common. And those scenes, the police officers shoving women to the ground and being overly aggressive when it wasn't necessary, you have to think that in the future, those scenes are going to be much more frequent going forward, which is, again, another depressing point. Like, you would think that, maybe after what happened on Saturday, people will be like, you know what, I don't think the police should be that draconian, but apparently not. The Conservative Party don't agree. And again, incredibly depressing all round. But what about the Labour Party, Michael? What about the Labour Party? Are they standing up for our civil liberties, being a strong opposition in the face of this authoritarian move from the government? Well,
yes,
well, kind of, because they did vote against the bill. But here's the thing, up until Friday, they were planning not to. They were planning to abstain. And this is the crazy thing. Yeah, you can see how harsh these laws are, but Labour, under Keir Starmer, were like, we're actually not going to press ahead with voting against the bill, because that might make us look soft on crime. And in fact, Labour's Shadow Home Secretary, Nick Thomas-Symonds, said the bill didn't go far enough, can you believe? He said, the measures in this bill will be cold comfort to the officers who have been offered a pay freeze in response for their remarkable bravery in this pandemic. Remarkable bravery. Yes, the Black Lives Matter supporters really put them under a lot of threat, didn't they? While Labour has been calling for a number of these changes, they will not go far enough to tackle violence against officers, which saw attacks on officers rise 50% over the past 5 years. So the way to, of course, stop this happening is just give police the power to lock away anyone who looks at them wrong. That's the correct solution. And Labour said, it didn't go far enough. So thankfully they reversed their position, and that was, good to see. But you can see their instincts were, we're actually going to abstain on this, and, we're just going to let the Tories basically crush civil liberties. And there's also the fact that Labour, earlier on in Starmer's leadership, back in 2020, were ordered to abstain on the Spy Cops Bill, which granted total immunity to undercover agents who commit crimes while infiltrating criminal gangs, despite, of course, that many of the victims of historical abuses of undercover agents have been women, and basically that was something that Starmer told Labour to abstain against. So basically, the opposition, again, at this time, has been found lacking, which is another incredibly depressing point. You may expect the Tories to be evil and cruel, but you may expect Labour to, stand up for civil liberties and stand up for, people who have been wronged by law enforcement officers, but no, apparently not. What do you have to say on that, Michael?
Yeah, I think it's terrible, and obviously I think that this is nothing new from Starmer, and obviously we've complained about him plenty of times before. I also want to say that I think one of the issues with this bill in particular is that it's a bill which necessarily cannot be consistently enforced, because as you pointed out, it's so broad and all-encompassing, and I think the issue there is that it means that it is going to be 100% up to the discretion of the government, or more particularly the Home Secretary, and of course individual policing organisations, where I'm imagining that certain protests, maybe protests which are beneficial to the political culture the Conservatives want to bring about, they're probably not going to face any issues, but it's going to be very minor, very peaceful protests which are against what the Conservative government government might want, they're going to be the ones who are, of course, causing annoyance. So I think that is the other concern. That is really the beginning of tyranny, I'd say, is when you reach a point where laws are not being enforced due to consistent criteria, but instead unclear criteria that's arbitrarily enforced.
Yeah, I like how, by the way, the press in the UK just haven't called this out a massive, like I say, infringement on civil liberties. Like, yeah, the police can stop a protest if, say, it's a Black Lives Matter protest, protesting systemic racism in the UK. But I don't know if for some reason there was a protest that said, police officers should get higher wages, a protest outside Parliament or something like that, then they could just let that go all day long. And yeah, that's the thing. It's just whatever, I guess, whatever the police like, whatever they don't like. Okay, you can have that protest. Oh, that's something that, we don't like. Well, you're not having that protest. And or something that the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, likes, and then something that she doesn't like. Again, like we supposedly live in a democratic nation, and the fact that Priti Patel can pass this, along with the Conservatives, all of them just backing this, is crazy and shows you how badly the situation is in the UK regarding democracy. But I do want to get back to Sarah Everard to finish off this video, Michael. And I want to read an article about her death by Moya Lothian McLean in the New York Times. It's titled, "She Was Just Walking Home. The killing of Sarah Everard has exposed the deadly truth of violence in Britain." The killing of Mrs. Everard, a 33-year-old marketing executive, set off an extraordinary outpouring of grief and anger in Britain. It tells a terrible story of sexism, misogyny, and patriarchal violence. But the killing of Miss Everard, suspected to be at the hands of a serving police officer, has exposed a deadly truth. In Britain, those entrusted to protect women from violence are actually enacting it, and the government's response is to give them more power. Perhaps Wayne Couzens, the police officer accused of Miss Everard's murder, could have been written off as a bad apple. But after Saturday, the police can have no such excuse. On Clapham Common, the park close to where Mrs. Everard disappeared, hundreds of women showed up to pay their respects at a vigil the authorities had banned on the grounds that it violated coronavirus restrictions. The gathering was peaceful until it wasn't. Night fell and the police moved in, body slamming young women to the ground in pictures that appeared on the front page of many national newspapers the next day. The brutality was shocking, but it was consistent with the police's record of gender-based violence. The evidence is stark. Between 2012 and 2018, a total of 562 officers in the police were accused of sexual assault. This is in the Met as well, but only 43 of them faced any disciplinary action. In Miss Everhard's case, from the officer guarding her remains who shared an offensive graphic with colleagues to the refusal to investigate a report of indecent exposure after Saturday's vigil, that institutional culture has been on full display. Protesters haven't been deterred. Since Saturday, demonstrations have been held daily in London, led by British feminist collective Sisters Uncut. Thousands have clumped together outside police headquarters and marched to Parliament and Trafalgar Square, two of the capital's most famous emblems of power. In their sights are not just police officers, but also the state, which underwrites and sanctions their violence. As if to prove the point, the government, panicked by unrest, has responded by calling for more stringent policing, along with promising to recruit 20,000 more police officers. The government plans to station plainclothes officers in clubs and bars to protect women from harassment. And Britain's Home Secretary Priti Patel is driving through legislation that would vastly expand police powers, including the right to curtail peaceful protests. Threads left dangling for so long are finally being pulled together, revealing the bloody tapestry of violence endured by women. It feels as though many at last recognise the institutional nature of that violence. You cannot weed out the bad apples when the entire system is what causes the rot. Now perhaps we can talk frankly about patriarchal violence. It's more than physical acts of violence, it's also the economic and psychological violence that keeps women subjugated through financial inequality, job insecurity, health inequality, and the climate of fear that surrounds women as we engage in acts as simple as strolling home at dusk. And there's more of the article, but that's, I think, a good place to end it. And I think this article gets to a really salient point, which is that basically, in certainly the case of Sarah Everard and all the women protesting, they're not just taking on, I guess, this idea of male violence, they're also taking on the actual state itself and all the power that has. And hopefully people in Britain do realise that and do start to make the connections. But again, like the author points out of the article, given the response to it, put plainclothes officers in clubs and Priti Patel driving through that legislation that would curtail the right to peacefully protest, it doesn't seem like the government are going to respond in any good way as we have seen. So yeah, final thoughts, Michael?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's funny because when obviously we initially heard about Sarah Everard and her death, the big concern was that nothing meaningful would change. And I think the reality that we've seen is that things are going to change, but I guess it just shows how terrible this country is when a death which you would hope might lead to some positive change is actually being used as a pretense now to deny women and other oppressed groups in the future the ability to democratically express their desire for things to get better.
Yeah, essentially, Sarah Everard's death, like we said at the start, she is the perfect victim, and it has exposed so many problems with British society. And yeah, but basically the conclusion that I take from this whole entire episode is look how bad things are, but nothing will change to make sure that this doesn't happen in the future. And yeah, that is, again, once more, just incredibly depressing.